It is our last week here of people becoming the church, and last week there are a few books that if you didn't pick one up or you'd like to pick one up for a friend, they're at a couple of the tables as you're leaving today. Today only $5, so if you're still interested in one of these books, you can get that. But we're going to just kind of wrap up what we've been doing these last 12 weeks. Anybody have a crazy week? Any crazy weeks? Anybody who went to camp had a crazy week. And if you haven't noticed, we do mobile church, which means like this stuff. When we came here this morning at 7, this room was empty. It'll be empty again at 12:30. And so we took most of this stuff and we took it to another space to do kids camp, and then we borrowed some stuff from here and there and everywhere. And we do a Friday night gathering that some of you have been to before. It's a dinner gathering, and that location shifted this week. So we emptied out another building yesterday morning. Some of the guys jumped down there. We've loaded up a different trailer. It's full. I mean, we move a lot. It was a crazy week. Here's a better question. Does anyone know someone who's crazy? Don't look left or right. Okay, yeah, okay. I see some fingers pointing. I see some things going on. I mean, we run into people, don't we? And I think we all have some tendencies where we're just not normal. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. People that always do the exact opposite of the way everyone else is supposed to do it. Like, the common etiquette of like walking up a set of stairs is what? Walk on the right? Okay, maybe you're the one that walks on the left. Have you done that before? It's quite enjoyable, especially with a lot of people. Bam, 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 bam. You're trying to get through that crowd. But who made up the rule that you got to walk on the right-hand side? I mean, us left-handed people, we sometimes get left out. It's like we should be able to walk on what side that we want to. But there's so many things we all do because it's the way it's always been done. And there's some things that we do that aren't normal, but it becomes normal because we do it. Anybody talk to themselves? Talk to themselves out loud? Out loud? Any out louders? Okay. Anybody, like the server comes at the Mexican restaurant and he's wearing like asbestos gloves when he brings that thing out of the fire oven, and he puts it on your table and he says, "Careful, there's a hot plate." And then the first thing you do is reach out and touch it. It's like, what's up with that? I mean, he warned you. He's wearing like a hazmat suit for fire protection. He sets it down, and then the first thing you do with bare hands is touch it. Anybody walk around the room when you're talking on the phone? Any walkers? Okay, that's not really normal. Anybody get impatient with their microwave? Huh? I mean, do you stand there as the microwave? It's like, what is this? Like, are you sure this clock is only 30 seconds? Because it sure seems like a minute as I'm standing here in front of this thing. Anybody, when you're showering, do you cup your hands and see how much water you can catch? That's not normal. Fold your arms maybe, see what you can. I mean, it's not normal. Have you ever plotted an escape route for a very unlikely scenario? Okay, we got a few of those people. You ever get nervous around water, and it's not because you can't swim, but you think your phone might fall in? That's the day we live in. And then here's the last one. Do you ever ask what, even though you heard what the person said?
Yes.
Yeah, see? What? I mean, we do that. But today I want to talk about, we just got a couple minutes, and I want to talk about not being normal, because I think Jesus, as we wrap up this series of people becoming the church, I think Jesus is asking the church, he's calling the church to not be normal. And that's kind of our big idea. Don't be normal. See, normal isn't working. Have you ever read and just kind of like taken the part of the Bible? Maybe you have a Bible that's printed in the red letters, and you read through the red letters and you read some of the things that Jesus said, and you're like, that's not normal. Because you see, the church isn't supposed to be normal. Now, there's a difference. Just one kind of caveat here as we get started. There's a difference between being weird and not normal. It sometimes is a fine line, but there's a difference between being weird and not normal. I don't think Jesus is calling us to be weird. I don't think that's asked. I don't find that in Scripture. I don't see Jesus that he was weird in that sense. I don't think he was normal, but I don't think he was weird. See, the gospel isn't normal. Have you just think about some of the things that Jesus said that weren't really normal? How about the first shall be last? Is that normal? That doesn't even make sense sometimes. How about love your enemies? Love and enemy shouldn't be in the same 3-word sentence. Become like a little child. I thought I was supposed to be mature. No, become like a little child and then you'll see the kingdom of heaven. If you want to save your life, you must lose it. That's not normal. Forgive as Jesus has forgiven you. Not normal. See, there's all these things where Jesus kind of spoke of, and it was like, this is not normal. And some of you have been around here for a while, and some of you, it's your first Sunday, I met you already, and there's a ministry we're involved in, and we had a lot of stuff going on, and we usually like to just spend a minute and highlight one of the guys when their graduation Sunday comes. And there's a ministry we're involved in that's not normal. It's called the Mission House. And I have a crazy story this week. We have you're going to be like, there's no way. So this guy had been corresponding with us. You can come up, Joel. So I'm going to get to Joel in just a second. But this guy had been corresponding with myself and with Godwin, who directs our Paulsbo house. And he was, this was his kind of release out of Clallam Bay. And so he got a ride down to Paulsbo. He knew the Mission House was in Paulsbo. He went to the library, he tried to find it, and so eventually he's walking. If you knew where the Mission House was in North Kitsap, it's kind of down a long potholed dirt road. You can actually lose a car in some of the potholes. Right now we're working on fixing that. But here comes what's his name?
His name is Frank.
Frank, here comes Frank. So Frank, he's just new this week. So Frank, like he gets from Clallam Bay, he's in Paulsbo, he doesn't know where in the world the Mission House is. He's walking down the driveway and he finally knocks on the door and is like, hey, is this the Mission House? And the guys are like, welcome home. Welcome home. See, the Mission House is in this community. We're in Paulsbo, we're in Bremerton, and it's around here. It's not normal. It's helping guys work through and walk through what it looks like to be transformed through the power of Jesus Christ and overcome some addiction stuff. And if you could hang out with the guys, and some of you do, it's crazy. There's no normalcy to the whole thing. And I get to do Bible study once a week at the house, and it's just like, you are kidding me. How in the world how do these 8 guys and a couple graduates that we put out in the outbuilding, how in the world is Jesus doing work? It's not normal. You would look at this and go like, there's no way this should work. How is it funded? How do these guys not kill each other? How do they go out to work? 16 guys are going to work every day doing something. It's like, we don't know sometimes where they're going tomorrow till the phone rings and someone's like, hey, I could use some guys over at my place. And you're like, thanks, Jesus, we got someplace to send the guys tomorrow. It's nuts. And Joel, you've been in the house how long?
I have been
You're good.
8 months now.
Well, use it. Just put it right.
8 months?
Yeah, just keep it right here.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. See good?
Yep.
Okay, there we go. So he's been in the house 8 months, and Joel, over these 8 months, what's Jesus done in your life?
He's done so many things, it's hard to just pick one, but the main thing is he's gave me my identity, and I know truly who I am in him, and I was searching for that my whole life, just trying to find these things in the world that were pleasing to me, but none of that was satisfying. And then I came to the Mission House broken and seeking for something. I just wasn't sure what. I mean, I knew a little bit about God, but not the way I do now. And I have a true relationship with him now, and I know who I am. I know him as a child, and there's confidence in that. And that's what I pretty much gained by being there and found out about myself through Christ, So, yeah.
So you're graduating today.
I am.
This afternoon down at the Gateway Gym where we did kids camp.
Yep.
And at 1:30, give him a hand.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
it's graduation, but it's just, tomorrow's the next day.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like maybe you've graduated from something before and you wake up the next day and it's like, oh, it's tomorrow. And then it's the next day. And so we highlight and we like to celebrate with these guys in this moment and kind of this next step for them. But I really view it, it's like, okay, tomorrow's the next day. And what's Jesus going to be doing in your life tomorrow and the day after that? And you're going to shift from the house next door to the outbuilding and stay with us for a little bit, right? You're kind of getting things recalibrated and sorted out in life, and we're excited about it. And I want to have a word of prayer with you, because there's nothing normal about Radio the Mission House and then just the transformation. Like if you see these guys, like look around and, you know, Frank will be walking the halls today, and look at Frank like 8 months from now, and it's a new Frank. It's a new Frank. It's Frank because now, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, it's Frank because all of a sudden Christ is at work in Frank's life. And he's taken up residence and he's dwelling there. And that's what Jesus has done for you, Joel. And I just want to have a word of prayer with you. And so, Lord, we thank you for Joel. And God, just as he's taking this step today that we celebrate kind of the completion of his season at the Mission House, you got some great plans, a great future, great opportunities as he continues to allow you to do the work that you've begun. Because you've begun it and you're faithful to complete it. Yes. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Bless you, Joel.
Thank you.
Couple verses I'd like to just leave with us today. Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, if you ever want to know like what was Jesus all about, read Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's kind of his core discourse. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's kind of when he first kind of gets into his public ministry. This is like this long recorded teaching. If the letters are read all the way through 5, 6, and 7. And there's a couple verses that I wanted to highlight that he said in there that I think are part of us figuring out what it looks like not to be normal. The first one is this. Matthew 5:13 says, "You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it's lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It'll be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless." So what's Jesus say? He says, don't be normal, be salt. Kind of a weird thing, just to like call somebody salt. But I think if we look at it for just a second, there was a time when salt wasn't as prevalent as it is today. I mean, anybody have a salt shortage in your life? No, most of us have a salt where you have too much salt. Like we'll go to the doctor and they'll go like, you need to kind of lay off the salt a little bit. I mean, it's kind of, that becomes our issue. It's not that there's not enough. Sometimes now there's some excess in what we call salt. But there was a time that there wasn't that much salt, and we didn't know as much about it. But salt became something that was discovered and how it could be used, and it became very valuable, and there was a scarcity to it. At the time that Jesus was writing this, there was more of a scarcity to this whole aspect of salt. You ever heard the phrase, worth his salt? That's a phrase they used to pay people in salt. How would you love to go to work this week and like your boss just comes up and like, man, here's a can of Morton's. You've been doing a great job. Have a great week. I mean, what are you going to do with a can of Morton? Nothing, because but it was valuable. And why was salt valuable in those days? A couple things. It was a purity agent. It was something that could help to purify. It was a preservative. Before refrigeration, salt drew out the moisture that caused decay. It was a flavoring agent. It decreases the bitterness. It increases our perception of the food we're eating. Table salt is sodium and chloride. The gospel salt, I think, is truth and grace. Jesus said, when we're salt, I think Eugene Peterson says this in the Message Bible. I think he said, we bring out the God flavors in the world. Have you noticed that our world doesn't have a lot of God flavoring? But you and I, as salt, when we step into this world, when we live out this life that's not so normal, where Jesus says, you are the salt, you and I have the opportunity to bring out God flavors in this world. The world needs salt. Don't be normal. Jesus is building a church that will be the salt. What did he say there? It says, you are the salt of the earth. Notice he didn't say you are the salt of the church. Right now, this place is overly salty. Because what did Jesus say? You are the salt. So you and 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 you. Just go around, look around. Here's the salt. Here's the salt. Have you noticed that salt doesn't do real good in the salt shaker? What do you have to do with the salt? You ever done that trick on somebody and lowered the lid? That's too much salt. That's too much salt. Right now we got a little too much salt going on. But once we, what is it, 10 o'clock? I'll get you out of here in a few minutes. And when we get out of here, what happens to the salt? The salt is going to scatter. The salt is going to leave the building. The salt is going to take its next steps. And you and I, we're not the salt of the church, we're the salt of the earth. We have to get out of the salt shaker. This is the salt shaker. We gather and then we are sent out on this mission that Jesus has called us to be the church. And we got to remember we're in his hands. He's got the big shaker. So when we step out of this place, this is what he's doing all week. And somewhere in there, he wants you to be kind of up there and ready to go to be the salt of the earth. Too much salt in one place is not good. But when we spread it out, that's when the good news begins to be shared. And he said something else, not only to be salt, he said also to be light. In the next verses, he said, you are the light of the world. Like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Anybody born before electricity? I think we've all qualified now. You're laughing. You were close, or sometimes I feel that way. But I mean, have you been to? How many of you have traveled to maybe like on a mission trip or something? And you've been someplace where they don't have electricity? Yeah, I've been a couple of those places. It's kind of weird. It's almost eerie at times if you've traveled someplace. I've been to Africa before, and Dominican Republic and Haiti, and there's just some places where you go and like electricity is not as common as we're used to just coming in and flicking a switch. And they're trying all kinds, there's some things coming with solar and all that. But it's like there were times when Jesus wrote this, when Jesus said this, there was no electricity. We've got thankful, Thomas Edison and others helped to change that. But in the New Testament times, when Jesus was speaking these words, people would oftentimes light a small lamp. And they would put it someplace where it would provide light for the house. I mean, every once in a while the power goes out and, kids might enjoy for an hour or two. Well, maybe not, with their electronics are all off. But like an hour or two when you can light a candle. But have you lit a candle in a dark room before? It's amazing what one candle can do in the midst of just absolute darkness. And Jesus says to the church, he says this, you are the light of the world. Don't hide it. Get your light in a place that everyone in the house can see. Have you noticed that the world's kind of dark? And we can kind of like get absorbed sometimes in the darkness. But Jesus said, hey, I get that it's dark, but what I really desire for you is I desire for you to be the light. And so as we step into this world, into our community, and we step into the relationships that God provides for us in the world that we live in, people need to see the light. The light provides hope. Have you been in a darkness before and like you finally get that glimpse of light and it's like, okay, I can see where I'm going now. I can see that there's an end to this tunnel. There's an exit to this cave that I'm in. Today, some of you might be sitting here needing to shine some light into your circumstances because it seems so dark. And Jesus today is shining his light through the church. I just want to wrap up with a couple verses, and I was thinking about it this week as he says, you are the light, you are the world. It's not like, hey, would you think about being the salt? Would you think about being the light? Would it be possible for you to be the salt? He said, you are. He spoke it in kind of a very present reality, that you are the salt, you are the light. And as we've been going through this whole series of people becoming the church, there's this element where the church, we have discovered, is not a building. I mean, this is a school cafeteria. So if we were dependent on a building, you and I would be in trouble because this wouldn't qualify itself. And as you look at kind of the history of how God related to his people, I've talked about this before, and I just want to spend just a minute because there's two verses I want us to see at the end. See, God had some unique ways that he interacted and built relationship with his people. If you read the Bible and you start the story, there was a moment when God's people had greatly been increased and multiplied in the nation of Egypt. There's a long story how they got there. They all of a sudden kind of became very prolific, and there was a time that it was time for them to leave. And there was a guy named Moses who was called, and a lot of backstory there. And God said, Moses, I want you to lead my people out of Egypt, and I've got a place that I've prepared for them called the Promised Land. And so there's a whole story of them getting out there. And they get in this place called the wilderness, and there was some disobedience, and God was working on some stuff. So they went camping for 40 years. Anybody campers? 40 years? 40 years? No, they camped for 40 years. They were mobile people for 40 years. And God, in the midst of that season of camping, said, I have an idea. You guys are living in tents. I'm going to build a tent, and that's where I'm going to stay in the campground. And so if you read like the book of Leviticus, if you get up in the morning and do your, I'd like to read the Bible, and I'm always kind of bogged down when I get in some of Leviticus, because it's page after page of like instructions on how to build his tent. And God was very specific. He's like, do this and that and that, and here's how size it is, set it up. And it's mobile church, so if you guys are moving, pack my tent up, and I got certain guys that I want you to trailer my tent down to the next campsite, and then you set me up, and then all the rest of you set up around me. And so God had a tent. They called it the tabernacle. And his presence was there. It was a cloud in the daytime. There was a fire at night. And sometimes the cloud would take off and everybody's like, all right, we're moving. God's moving and we're going with him. And so they'd pack the tent up. They'd pack themselves up and off they'd go. They'd follow the cloud. They'd set the tent back up. And that was God's presence. So they made it finally to this land that God had promised him. And he's still living in the tent. And David was a king at that point. And he looked around and he's like, man, I got this beautiful palace. I have a home. I should build God a home. I should get him out of the tent. And God's like, I appreciate your efforts, but I'm going to let your son Solomon do it. And so you can read another section of the Bible, and it's all the instructions of how they built a beautiful home for God called the temple. And so now God's presence was there. So he moved from a tent to a temple. He got an upgrade, but that temple was destroyed. And God said, you know what? I got to do something about this. And God sent his son Jesus to this earth. And Jesus came, and if you read the book of John, first chapter, John 1:14 says, Jesus dwelt among us. If you read that word kind of in how it originally was written, it says Jesus tabernacled. Jesus set up his tent among us. So now all of a sudden, here's humanity, here's the campground, and all of us, and Jesus comes and he's like, here, I'm here. I was in a tent, I was in a temple, now I'm right here in the physical. So that was cool. I mean, you got God on this earth in the form of Jesus. I mean, it's cool, but what happened to Jesus? That's what we saw in the beginning of this series. Jesus was crucified, he resurrected, he spent a few days with his followers, and then he left. And he's like, I'm out. You guys have this mission to be the church, to become the church. And he's like, this is your mission. And if I'm Jesus, I would have stayed around a little longer. I just rose from the dead. People are going to want to listen to me now. I got a message, man. I was dead. You saw me die. I'm alive. Let's get this thing going. And he's like, no, I'm leaving it with you. I am leaving it with you. You are the church. You're the salt. You're the light. And so as you and I scatter out of this place, and as we finish this series today, two final verses. First one is Galatians 2:20. It says, "My old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me." You know what that means in the Greek? Christ lives in me. That's what it means. And then this other one, "And this is the secret, Christ lives in you. This gives you assurance of sharing his glory." So people becoming the church, yeah. Jesus said, "You are the salt, you are the light." He lived in a tent, he lived in a temple, he was in the form of his son, Jesus Christ, who was God living on this earth. Jesus left, he said, "I'm empowering you with my Holy Spirit." And so it's no longer you that lives, but it's Christ who lives in you. So are we the church? Absolutely. Absolutely. So we gather like this, but then these moments coming up in about 60 seconds, we scatter. And as we scatter, we're salt, we're light, we're who God has called us to be within the realm that he has called us to. Right now, it feels like we're living in the Pacific Northwest. He might ask you to go somewhere else, but right now you're right here. And so what does it look like for you to become and to be the church? That's what Jesus has for us. Because it's like when we come out, it's like people are like, wow, there's some light going on. Yeah, it's not me, it's Christ in me. Wow, this is a little salty. Well, it's not you, it's Christ in you. Allow him to dwell within you. Allow him to do the work that he wants to do, because in and through you, that's his mission. That's his plan. He could have done all kinds of different ways to keep this mission alive. The way he empowered the mission was he gave it to you and I. And he said, be the salt, be the light, allow me to dwell within you, because I've got a great work to do to bring healing and hope to this world. And you're my plan A and my plan B and my plan C. My plan is in you and through you. So you and I have been empowered. We've been challenged. And as we wrap up this series,